What is going on? I want to welcome you from F Court for today, Tuesday, September 20th. I am your host, Sean Murphy, alongside my guy, Jeff Frady. Jeff, what it do, baby? How's it
What
going, man?
it's going good, man. We got Monday Night Football. I'm watching football because it's getting me to basketball season, and I cannot wait because I'll be watching the Pistons. I'll be watching the Lions. So I need them all at once. As much as
Yeah,
I love football and I love watching the NFL, I like having both games on. To be honest with you, so it is what it is. But I'm excited for basketball season. I really am.
yeah. I mean, football's great and all, but I mean, there's basketball on 7 nights a week during
Right.
the season, and there's really only football like 3 days a week. And like, how much of it's really worth watching? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But basketball, it's always a good time. As of recording, we are a week away from Pistons Media Day. And with that, there's going to be a whole ton of coverage. So be sure you're clicking that subscribe button down
Do
below
it.
because that's where you're going to be getting some of the best Pistons and NBA coverage in the country. I'm telling you, man, we are coming for that mother crown, baby. But with that, Jeff, it's time to talk about some pretty big developments in the NBA world, specifically in the NBA drafting realm. As
Mhm.
it is around that time for the NBA to start talking about the upcoming collective bargaining agreement. And there currently is a mutual opt out date in December. And with that always comes new items and things to put into the collective bargaining agreement. And according to Shams, two of the things that are being talked about in the upcoming collective bargaining agreement and things to be added or potential items would be draft age eligibility from 19 to 18, which would be the return of high school to NBA,
Mhm.
and a measure that allows players citing mental health similar to physical injury. Now, the mental health thing that is a great, that is a great thing for players. It is a great step in understanding and recognizing mental health. But Jeff, that first thing is a really big deal. I mean, it has been years since we have seen guys be able to come out of high school and go straight into the NBA. And when we have seen it, it's varied in success. Now, some guys have been incredible, but then there's other guys like, Kwame Brown who have come out of high school
Well,
and
yeah.
it was not quite incredible.
And I guess that's the trade-off you get because it depends on the player too.
Yeah,
Like a lot of guys might be mature enough to handle it, and I think with a guy like Cade Cunningham, that's a player that probably could have came out of high school and went to the NBA. Zion, see, it's different. There's physically, and then there's mentally. I think
right.
Zion physically could enter the NBA right away, and mentally as well. But with Cade, it was the mentally, the physically. I mean, yes, he's getting a lot stronger, but his game, like guys can, and especially nowadays and how players are built coming up, a lot of guys can go to the NBA out of high school. The question is, it's on the player. Like with college in the G League, the amount of options they have overseas, you can make money playing basketball either way, just if you're ready to go to the NBA. So for them, it's really up to the player, but I love that the NBA is doing this. And on top of the mental health thing, like that's them being proactive. And I love it because the NBA has always been proactive. I know we've criticized them for the Robert Sarver stuff, but overall, you got to love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you and I mean, we just recorded, the From Half Court podcast right before this, and we talked a little bit about, what this would mean. And I think one moment that was very instrumental in my evolution and my views in this area was when Zion Williamson's injury happened on national television 8
Mm-hmm.
seconds in to that Duke North Carolina matchup. I mean, you talk about a guy having the potential to lose his entire future legacy, his future wealth, the some generational wealth that could
Right.
forever radically change a family. And if someone's going to be a number one overall pick out of high school, they're going to be a number one overall pick when they come out of college. That's not the only way that changes is if they have an injury. So
Right.
at its very core, if a guy's going to get selected in the lottery out of high school, there just might not be something for them at college. Now, again, it's not something that's a perfect system. It's a risk for the team, but it's a risk for the players too, because losing that eligibility is definitely a risk and it's definitely a factor. But I mean, Jeff, we even saw the Detroit Pistons take the risk of getting the youngest player in the draft this past season.
Hey,
Practically, for all intents and purposes, someone who came out of high school.
and he could have.
He very well could have. Very well
Physically,
could have.
yes, he could have. And I think this is a point. And by this time tomorrow, we're going to be discussing this more often. You guys are going to want to check out the pod coming up. It's a great topic. But I wanted to mention too, the NBA nowadays is less physical. Like back then, you had J.R. Smith, you have your Kevin Garnett's, the Kobe Bryant's. Like these are some of the greatest players. Now, you know, J.R. Smith is what he is. He became a role player pretty much for his career. But early on, he was a stud. I do want to say, though, the physicality of the NBA, significantly less than it was with all the rule changes. So players coming into the league now out of high school, there is less of that. You know, you're playing a grown man's game. It's still a grown man's game, but it's not football. You don't have to go to college to build your body up to get to the NBA. If you could play, you could play. And I think now, before with Zion, when the players weren't making money, at least legally, it's tougher because you're like, well, Zion, you could have went into the NBA out of high school. You could have changed your family's fortune, your family's future. But nowadays, it's like you could still get paid, depending on the player, in college. So I think it's much more of a, it's almost like free agency coming out of high school. Do you want to go to the G League? If you're really good, the G League, college, or go to the NBA. But it's really up to the player too, because like we talked about, if a player feels like he's not going, top 10, but if he goes to college for 1 year, he can be a top 10 pick. I mean, for me, it makes more sense to go to college for a year, make money, and then make even more money in the pros. But again, like I said before, I think now with the NBA and how less physical it is, it's completely up to the player. And a lot of guys physically now can come right out of high school. That's just how it is.
Yeah. Now, Jeff, I'm going to be honest. Going forward, I don't really see the Pistons being in a position to where they're going to be getting guys that are going to be straight out of high school. Because in my personal opinion, if a guy is good enough to come out of high school, they're good enough. It's because they're going to be a top 5 pick. If they're not going to be a top 5 pick, I think the odds of them coming out of high school are very low. I think even if you're like a mid lottery or end of lottery type guy, I think they would still want to go to college and improve and become a top 5 guy and do that in the process. Right. So I think that's generally like what you see. But I also think, the reason why, and like we even talked about like how the Pistons took the chance on the youngest player in the draft this last year. The reason they did it was because they went and got a guy who not only they believed in as a player, but a guy that they believed in as a person, a guy that they saw the work ethic that he was putting in, a guy who, they cited his character and everything that he was doing there. And I think that's important because I think you compare it to when the Pistons just a few years ago drafted Sekou Doumbouya, who was the youngest player in his draft class, and when he came in, was the youngest player in the NBA. And for him, he was someone that he was much more of an unknown commodity. He's someone that's only 21 years old now, but there were questions about his work ethic at his time in Detroit. There was kind of questions of why he wasn't getting consistent time in the rotation. And I think now with what you're seeing with that evolution and with where Detroit's going to be at, the reason why I just don't see this as much of a factor is because, they talk about how young this team is. They're like, well, you need older guys too. So like, I think Detroit is going to be more okay with taking older guys. But Jeff, let's talk about that real quick. What would it take for not just like the Pistons to draft someone out of high school, but what would it take for a team to make that risk to draft someone out of high school in general? And what does it take for that type of player to be successful in the modern NBA?
I think for Troy's sake, he's done a good job of mixing it up. I mean, you take Saddiq Bey, a guy who went to college for multiple years. You take Isaiah Stewart, who was one and done. You take Cade, who's one and done. And then you take jaden Ivey, who's a 2-year college player, collegiate player. So I guess it depends really on the player's development as it is. But for me, like for Troy to reach and I wouldn't say reach, but take a player out of high school.
It's definitely a swing.
Yeah, it's definitely a swing. And it would have to be a player with a tremendously high upside. I think, and for me, that would be at probably a forward because you take Jalen Duren because of what he looks like physically. You're not taking, in my opinion, at least a point guard, one of these guys that are 6'1", 6'2", out of high school to play a significant role. Like Sekou, for Sekou's sake, and I want to talk about that for a second, like, I think that was more of his mindset, like mentally. I just don't think he was ready for the league. Physically, he was, but his mindset coming as the youngest player, having the role he did.
And again, that's where I talk about where he's the unknown commodity. Because
absolutely.
Because where we saw physically, there are no questions about what he was as an athlete. Like you saw him right away, and it was like, all right, no doubts there. But like when he's in a different country, when there's a
Yep.
language barrier, like that stuff on the internal, like with Jalen Duren, you can sit down and meet his family and like, you know what I'm saying? Like that's
Yeah.
a different thing.
Yeah, yeah, and I think Troy also, to add on top of that, he loves guys with high motors. Like all the guys he's taken, Jaden Ivey plays with passion. Cade, is as much as he is reserved, he still is out there killing dudes. And I think with Isaiah Stewart, Sadiq Bey, Jalen Duren, like Troy doesn't. You don't really have questions about who's Troy's taking in terms of motor. I guess Killian, he's more reserved. You got to figure that out. But other than that, he's been pretty spot on with what kind of character he likes, and even Killian checks out that character. You know, all the list he's looking for. So for me, it would have to be a forward because that's what the Pistons need. I'm a little biased, but a guy who has a lot of upside, a lot of length, like has all the intangibles, like a Jalen Duren. But instead, you're taking a forward who, you know, we talked about Mikal Bridges as a good guy you'd want on your team. I feel like that's the mold you're looking for. Like if you can find a guy who's young, raw, has a lot of upside, and has the mindset that he's mature enough to enter the league and be ready to take on all of those responsibilities, I think Troy would take a chance at him, no doubt.
Yeah, without a doubt. And you know, I think. The other thing too is that I think this is just another option. You know, this will if this is indeed the direction they go. And to clarify, right before this video started, Woj did give clarification that even though this is something that will be discussed in the upcoming collective bargaining agreement, as of right now, there's no movement on that actually, you know, happening. So this is something that's more so that something on the docket to be discussed. We don't know if we'll actually go through. However, I mean, if a player's allowed to have the option to either go straight into the NBA or go to the G League Ignite or go overseas or go to college or, you know, have an NIL deal,
Right.
Jeff, I think we're about to head into an age that is going to produce the best prospects we've ever had, because I think now more than ever, the options are truly out there for the players to truly have the path that will put them in the position to succeed and to put them in the position to excel.
And you see how much more valued it is. Like back then, you even had guys like J.R. Smith, guys that play different sports. Like now it's basketball all year round when you're a young kid. Like you're pretty much decided, hey, I'm good at this. I'm going to pursue this. Guys are becoming better and better at a younger age. Like you're seeing guys now coming up like in the 2025 class where you're like, is this kid's a what? Like he's not a senior or junior already. So it's just different. It's a different age. And I'm glad that players now, if you're talented enough, you have those options, because before, like back then in the day, like you had to go to college to go to the NBA to feed your family. Now you can be like, you know what? I can go to the G League, make money. I can go to the college, make money, or I can enter the NBA and at worst make, you know, a decent amount of money. So I think it's good for players in general, players that need the money and also have the talent to do it. So
yeah,
it's a win-win in my opinion.
Well, yeah, and not even just, you know, not even just about the money too, but just like what's the best decision, not only for their personal well-being, but also for their professional well-being and for the best sake of their game as well.
Right.
Because it's not just the cut, you know, it's just not the clear-cut path for everyone's game to be like, some guys need the challenge of getting to the NBA level. Some guys need to be in a situation where they're in a community like a college that's a little more tied in, that has a little bit more oversight, that has a little bit more parenting, for a lack of better terms, right? Like, and some people, they need to go grow up and need the reality of, this is a business, go about your business, right? Like it's just, they're different worlds. But with that, what do you think of these changes? Would you be interested in seeing the Pistons possibly having the chance to go after a prospect out of high school, possibly a Bronny James, question mark? Let us know in the comment section down below. But also be sure you follow my guy, Jeff Iafrady, at Jeff Iafrady, and be sure you tune in Monday through Friday to watch my boy on the Morning Woodward Show. But also, if you're feeling charitable, if you want to maybe, you know, take some extra time out of your day, follow your boy Sean Halfcourt right down there as well, because I tend to tweet. I say things. I do stuff. Yeah, I think I'm a good follow, I'd say. But with that, I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. We will catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure to subscribe.